what's up, people? Welcome to the MILPA show. And today we have two guests from the MILPA family. We have Airam Coronado, who's a programs and leadership assistant at MILPA. And we have Desiree Rosas, who's a Prop 47 assistant at MILPA. And so I'm going to go ahead and pass it to them to just do a general check-in.
So yeah, hello everybody. Glad to be here. For myself, I'm doing pretty good. Yeah.
What's up, everybody? My name is Airam Coronado, and I'm doing pretty good myself. You know, it's a very sunny day outside, just enjoying the weather.
Same. I was telling them I took a nap earlier on the MILPA couch, so I'm feeling pretty well. Also, a little bit refreshed, and we have some folks here in the office. We haven't been here in the office in a while, so it's, you know, making sure that we're keeping our distance and being safe, but it feels good to be in the office as well. So if we can start it off, I'm going to popcorn it to you, Airam. If you can tell us a little bit more about when you were younger, who you are, and what led you to work at MILPA, and then you can pass it to Des.
Yeah, when I was younger, you know, that's quite a story. So, you know, growing up, you know, I was raised by a single mother, grew up in the east side of Salinas, and, you know, growing up, I was labeled as a troubled youth, entered the foster care system and the juvenile justice system at a very young age. You know, I was a very, you know, I was just a youth, you know, that wasn't being heard, you know, was going through my own struggles, you know, and a lot of things led me to, you know, in a community that's, you witness a lot of community violence, you know, so it just led me to have to struggle with myself, right? And there wasn't any support out in the community. There wasn't any programs for me other than juvenile hall, right? Incarcerating youth and stuff. So what led me to do work with MILPA is I was introduced to this type of work, right, in 2016 by one of my mentors. And I was working with a different program. And then I was introduced, you know, I started doing work with MILPA, doing Prop 47 work, and then doing youth work, which I totally enjoy. Who am I now? Well, I'm a student, I'm a mother, also a youth, you know, and yeah.
Yes, thank you, Airam, for sharing. I would say for myself, my story is very similar to Airam's. So as a youth, I was also, I guess you can say, labeled as a troubled youth. I grew up in an environment in a community that also experienced the same community violence. And I would say you could see a lot of disparities. So you see a lot of low-income people struggling with their mental health within the community that I was growing up in. So I think that influenced my behavior a lot. So I'd say I would get in trouble. I was labeled a troubled youth as well. And for myself, I believe the biggest difference for me would have been a little bit more resources, somebody who would have helped me out with those kind of issues. So, but unfortunately, I didn't have that. And it led to me pretty much going into different types of systems, going from juvenile hall to the adult system. And that I believe that kind of ties into my work at MILPA as well. So being within these systems and realizing the inequities and realizing that there were certain systems that was put in place for myself and for people like me to end up that way. So definitely realizing that and wanting to do something about it. I believe there was a Tropochkali group that I had applied for. It was an internship program. And I interviewed for the internship program, ended up getting placed with a job there at MILPA. I believe that they seen something that I didn't even see in myself, which is awesome. And every day I wake up and I'm like, yes, love working here, love doing what I do, and just very grateful to be able to help people and especially people like myself. Definitely feels good to do that. So yeah, that's just a little bit about myself.
Orale. And if y'all can tell us, starting with Des, just tell us a little bit more about your respective role as a Prop 47 assistant. Like, what does it mean to do that type of work? And just what does your work entail? And then we'll popcorn over to Airam.
Okay, so yes, I am the Prop 47 assistant. So what we do is we provide record reduction and dismissal services for people who qualify. So this entails Prop 47 qualifying cases, and as well as 1203.4's petitions for dismissal, depending on, like I said, if you qualify, and just providing those services for the people that generally wouldn't have that. I feel like my role is kind of like that middleman between the court system and these people that sometimes don't really understand the process. So just being able to be that person for them and help at least alleviate some of that stress and get them to get a better life. I believe it's like a new start for some people, getting certain things taken off their record that would hold them back for career or housing or what have you. So yeah, I believe that's a little bit about the Prop 47 work. So go ahead.
Cool. So my title is a program leadership assistant, and basically anything that has to do with programming, you know, any youth círculos, women círculos, you know, any community círculos as well. So for right now we have Xinachtli, we have monthly women circles, and we're going to start Sembrando la Milpa the first week of October. So anything that has to do with groups or programming, I'm involved. Anything that has to do with, you know, organizing out in the community, advocating for the community, you know, on the local level. That's basically my role, right? Supporting our community and our folks the best we can. So that's a little bit about the work that I do.
If you can tell me a little bit more, starting with you, Airam, what is the importance, if we take a look at MILPA's mission of ending mass incarceration, dismantling the school to prison pipeline, and otherwise helping people gain leadership skills and finding their voice to be engaged, why is this important to you specifically? And then you can popcorn to Des.
It's important for me because coming from, you know, once again, coming from the system of incarceration and in the foster care system, right? We oftentimes deal with the symptoms, right? That's community violence, but looking more into a deeper root of the root causes of it, right? That are the systems that have been in place. And how do we could deal with the symptoms, right? We could work with the symptoms, that's fine. But if we really want things to change, we have to look at the root causes. You know, that's mass incarceration, that's the school to prison pipeline, you know, and other systems that have been set in place. So for me, it's very important because I've been put in those systems where I know it doesn't help our people. Systems that are designed to keep people in cages and keep them incarcerated and keep them in a system that's generation to generation, right? Intergenerational. And how are we going to stop this, you know? And not only how are we going to stop this, but how are we going to make things better for our community for the next 7 generations? You know, I have a son, so for me it's very important, you know? He's a brown baby, you know? And it's just, I don't want to see him in those systems, the same systems that I was involved, that his father was involved in. And how do we make our community better? You know, for a community that I love the most, you know, our community, Salinas in general is so beautiful itself. It has so many resources, you know, so much culture, and it's, you know, all the systems that have been set in place are just, it's not valued as much. You know, our people are not valued for being hardworking people. So for me, it's very important that we start working with the root causes of the issues, so our next 7 generations don't have to face the symptoms of them.
Orale, and before I pass it on to Des, I'll just go ahead and say that a lot of the work, I've been here at MILPA for 6 months, and a lot of the work that I've been learning about or engaged in is being able to ensure that community members have the voice, right? It's sometimes as simple as facilitating, you know, letting people know, hey, this is when the city council meeting is happening. Because a lot of people are working, a lot of young people are even during this pandemic, it has been really difficult for people to even kind of have a sense of normalcy or community because it can get tiring over like the computer, right? And so it's important to be able to create this space as much as possible, as you're saying, to be able to engage the community and make sure that we are raising our voices for the things that matter. And so with that, I'll pass it on to you, Des, for you to answer a little bit more as to like, why is this work important to you?
Okay, for myself, and I'm not gonna be able to put it as eloquently as Airam did, but I would say it's a lot of the similar things. So I am also a mother, just being put through the things that I have been put through because of these systems that are in place, having being part of that mass incarceration, and being part of these different things that we're trying to get rid of or dismantle, definitely paved the way for me in the way I think. I would definitely want better for my child, better for our future generations. Definitely, and in a way, myself too, I would like to think about it as like breaking generational curses as well. So doing this for myself, I'm doing this for my mother and my grandmother, I'm doing this for my son and his future children, and whatever other children that I might have. Just creating a better future for them, and making this world a little bit better, even if it's just a small little dent in the world, is just something to make a difference, I would say, for myself. But yes, I'd say that's what is important to me in the work I want to try.
Orale, y'all are amazing. And so Xinachtli actually started, today's Friday, September 25th, and it actually started on Tuesday. And so if you can tell us a little bit more, what is Xinachtli and why is it important? And we'll start it with you, Des.
You know what, I'm gonna go ahead and pass that one to Airam. She's been doing Xinachtli for a very long time, and I just feel like she would have a little bit more expertise on that one. So go for it.
I think you got it, Des, but I can go ahead. So it's important. Xinachtli, it's a, now a word for germinating seed, right? And I think it's very important, right? Xinachtli, the curriculum is very important because we're like more like having conversations with youth, conversations that, that some of us didn't have, right? Because sometimes our parents don't know how to conversate with us. Or sometimes we might not be open to listen to them, right? So it's very important because we talk about boundaries, we talk about respect, sacredness, and not only that, but also about our, reproductive health, what are healthy boundaries, healthy relationships. So it's more like a conversation that we're having with them, right? Things that probably me and Desiree didn't have those conversations. So we'll go ahead and pass these healthy conversations and how to facilitate these conversations when they're dealing with, with their own baggages and also their gifts, right? We have to look at things in the bright side as well. And it's not so much that they learn from us, we actually learn a lot from them. Each group is different. Each group, like each young woman, they're very unique, and they all bring their own themselves to this space, so the conversations that we have each cohorts, they're not the same. We try to keep it the same, but we know it's not going to be the same. So just having those conversations with them each week, we focus on consciousness, we focus on health, and it's very important to talk about boundaries because we're all in a stage, from ages 14 to 24 where we should know what boundaries are, how to use our voice, and how to make sure that, that we practice it as much as we can, and carry yourselves like that as well.
Yeah, I can say for myself that I didn't learn about boundaries or healthy relationships until I was much older, past the age of 24. And I feel like it could have saved me a lot of heartbreak and confusion. But again, like growing up in a Mexican Catholic household, a lot of the sexuality is very sinful. Even talking about topics of again, like sexuality, reproductive health, like we don't have those conversations. And especially as a queer person, like it's like a sin, like you can't talk about that, right? And I've seen that in Xinachtli, it's a very open, the times that I've been there, it's a very open space to welcome gender expansive, non-binary, queer youth, LGBTQ youth into the space for them to be able to have a community, right? And so let me pass it to Des, and if you can tell us, y'all had the first session on Tuesday. How was that session for you, Des? Like what did you see from the students, from the youth, that really kind of stood out for you?
Yes, okay, so it went very well, I believe. I had a good time. So it was basically like an introductory session, and everybody was just, we're at the get to know you stages. But what I did see, because we do ask them pretty much what are they expecting, or what would they like to see within the group. And a lot of these young ladies just said, we just want to create like a bond. We want sisterhood. We want, and just also expressing how much they appreciated that we were holding this space for them. That was, I feel like, the biggest thing for me, is just realizing that this is something important for these youth to experience, and being able to hold that space for them is just awesome.
Yeah, so we've been talking a lot about, and we did it in June, right? MILPA was at the forefront of being, and has been doing the work for a long time, of making sure that people are engaged when it comes to the city and the county budget. And so the city of Salinas is actually going to vote again on the budget on Tuesday, October 13th. and the county will revisit their budget in December. And so what do you feel, well, you know, Airam, you being from the city of Salinas, and Des, you considering Soledad home and it being in the Monterey County, what do you think the city and or the county should invest in? Especially thinking about as when you were youth, what could you have benefited from? Des, you alluded to, you know, having some type of mentorship or resources, right? And so if you can go into a little bit more depth into that, feel free to do so. We're going to start with Airam and then pass it over to Des.
Yeah, what do I feel that city and the county should invest in? That's an easy question from all the top. They should invest in our youth, right? Just here in Monterey County, right? We have a new Salinas Police Department, total of 2 Salinas Police Departments. We have a new juvenile hall. We have a youth center. We have a new county jail. We have 2 prisons, 2 state prisons right outside Salinas in less than 15-mile radius, right? And that just shows itself where the county or just our elected officials, where their priorities are at. And that's just wrong. I'm sorry. And you know what? Unapologetic. I'm not sorry. It's just, you know, like coming from myself that was system impacted, you know, it does not help. It does not help having our youth incarcerated. Why are we investing so much money in this new juvenile hall? Because they care for our youth. That for me sounds off. If you really care for our youth that are the future, you know, they are the future. We are the future of Salinas and the whole county, and even the wider spectrum of the state. You know, it is just, they should invest more in youth programs. You know, growing up, it's just in the east side of Salinas, it was, you know, the streets were all witnessing a lot of community violence, right? And, you know, a lot of poverty and so forth, right? Parents being at work all the time, you know, we're being agriculture workers. And it's just like, they care so much for our community. Why not invest in them? You know? And what would I tell youth out there if they, you know, it's so important for their voice. It's so important for them to stand in solidarity with each other, for our community to stand in solidarity with each other. Because no mother likes seeing their kids incarcerated or criminalized, you know, just because they're walking on the wrong streets, or just because they're being harassed just by the way they look, or because they can afford or white plain t-shirts or black plain t-shirts, because they're cheap, you know. And for them to be wearing their pants a little bit baggy, you know, for them to be criminalized like that. Some youth don't have money to even have a proper haircut, so they go bald. And just because you see a bald youth walking down the street doesn't make him a gang member, you know. So it's just reimagining how our community would be if we have the resources, if the youth and the mothers and the parents, you know, will have the resources that are really needed. You know, we need more investment in better parks, in better recreations, in free sports, things, a real youth center, not a youth center that keeps our kids in cages. What is that? You know, and it's just, their priorities are just all wrong. You know, it's time for them to hear the community, and actually start listening to them, you know, so for them to invest in the LS of vibrancy plan. You know, the city did approve it, but they have not invested in it, and it's going for another year with no investment. What is that? You literally just promised something to the community that will make the community put so much input in this. It wasn't just one meeting. It was several meetings, so many hours invested in what does the community want, or what does the community need, right? And the community told them what we needed, and there has been no investment in it whatsoever. You know, and it's time for them to follow their palabra, their word, you know, as a woman, as a man, or as elected official. You know, come on, you know, time is now, not 3 years from now. You know, it's right now, it's time.
Yeah, and especially considering that we're in the middle of a crisis. This pandemic is unprecedented. So, you know, in speaking with other people from MILPA and just in general, it's like, what are we saving them? Like, if there is money, and there is money because like the taxpayers pay their taxes, right? And there is revenue. And even considering that the police department has 45% of the budget, it's like that we really do need to invest in the community. But let me pass it to Des. Des, if I can get a little bit more of your insight from the county level, even from the city level, like you being from Soledad, you know, what do you feel the elected officials should be investing in? How should city, county staff be thinking about how to structure the budget?
Okay, well, oh, goodness gracious. For myself, I would say I would definitely agree with Airam when it comes to the youth. We do want to invest in our youth. That is something that's very important. They're the future. We need to be doing that. I feel like that's just kind of like common sense for some people, but not most, apparently. But I would say also just trying to take a look at mental health as well. A little bit more focus on our youth and their mental health, as well as culturally relevant programs. So we do have a lot of ag programs or sports programs, but there's not really a lot of focus on people's culture. I feel like that would be something that would be very beneficial. Have these youth feel represented in a way. Let's see, what else? Yes, I believe that's all that I could think of right now.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with the cultural programming, just because, and I've shared this with other folks, but I didn't learn about Mexican American studies until I went to school when I was 18 in college, right? And even that is a privilege, and it costs money. Like, it wasn't something that was available in public school, because when I was in high school, it's like we only learned really about like white history, and then in there sprinkled in like, hey, like Mexican American history, right? And so it's like you don't really even learn about that. And then even going beyond that, it's like, what does it mean to be indigenous, right? Because now, having worked at MILPA for 6 months, that itself is a journey of learning, like, what does it mean to be indigenous? What is the culture? What are the like rites of passage? What is the language, right? And I know a lot of the MILPA folks are taking a Nahuatl class together, right? Learning different wordings and whatnot. And so if Airam, if you can speak a little bit more to what Desiree brought up of like cultural programming for the young people, maybe mental health as well.
No, yeah, definitely. Thank you, Desiree, for bringing that up. You know, and when we talk about issues, right? When I talk about, you know, the symptoms of that we have, for example, community violence, right? And when we talk about organizing, you know, one way to ground ourselves that's very important is knowing our history, knowing what our people went through, knowing that history can actually repeat itself, and it's actually repeating itself, right? Knowing that, you know, it hasn't been easy for our people of color, right? And having cultural relevance and just cultural programs for youth, you know, speaking for myself, I know that's definitely has helped me out, you know, and it's just grounding ourselves, you know, what does grounding look like to us? You know, people have different ideas, but grounding ourselves with an indigenous perspective of things, right? Hey, using, you know, certain medicine, sage, and so forth, but most importantly, keeping our palabras as a person, right? As a person and so forth. So that's what I mean by cultural relevant programs, right? Relevant to our community, relevant to to ourselves, and most relevant to our youth. You know, oftentimes, for example, Xinachtli, right? Oftentimes, the women are like this young women are just, you know, oh, it's just something that's happening, you know, or our body goes to changes, but no, actually knowing how sacred our bodies are, you know, knowing how sacred our relationships are. You know, and how do we move forward once we receive so much trauma? You know, do we want to, you know, it's easier for us to feel mad than to feel sad, but how do we navigate that? You know, how do we navigate being vulnerable with ourselves, and actually taking care of ourselves? You know, and taking care of ourselves can mean so many different things, but definitely having that space that we hold for other youth and that we have to hold for ourselves when we're having a rough time, for us to ground ourselves. Because we could organize as much as we want, and at the end of the day, the movement is going to go on. Towards the end of the day, we're going to be so tired, and we're just going to burn ourselves out. So it's just, how do we center ourselves? You know, it's so important, you know, knowing where our grandparents come from, you know, because that we will know more history about ourselves. And like you mentioned, you know, we don't learn this through school. We don't learn our real history through school. You know, that history has been so watered down that we oftentimes are just battling with ourselves. You know, like, oh, they consider us savages and woo, you know, when in reality, like, no, that's not true. You know, we're strong, resistant, resilient people. You know, that we've been fighting white supremacy, colonization for more than 500 years. You know, the intergenerational trauma that we hold, that we carry with ourselves. How are we going to take care of ourselves? So having that cultural indigenous, you know, narrative where we get to, you know, ground ourselves, even if it's just, oh, you're just burning sage. Yeah, and that helps. You know, listening to our elders. You know, what better than having one of our elders just sit down and have, you know, them telling us stories, or just them even telling us, you know, any advices. That's so important. You know, even asking your grandma, like, hey, grandma, like, what do you think about this? If you do have that relationship with them, right? But it's relationship building, and it's just more than just culture. It's knowing who you are and guiding that fire, or guiding that water, that healthy femininity, the healthy masculinity, or, you know, that omateo, everything that's in between, you know. So yeah, having that, I just went on a tantrum. I just don't know.
Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you, Airam. I love it. It was dope, dude. You were drawing me in. I was like, tell me more. I was going to say, you know, you both have said intergenerational trauma, or some form of that, pain, community violence. When I hear the word violence, I think about verbal, emotional, psychological, physical, sexual violence specifically, right? And these are things that I have experienced myself. Now, if you can go into a little bit defining more what violence means to you, and that way we can kind of pinpoint, like, this is the violence that we actually go through. This is the violence that we've been going through ever since colonization, ever since, you know, Christopher Columbus setting foot on this side of the hemisphere. So Des, if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure, no problem. So for myself, I would say definitely what you described, I would consider violence as well, but I feel like there's other forms that aren't really talked about. So like the systems that are in place for myself, I would feel like that's violence towards people like myself, BIPOC people, specifically. These systems were put in place to keep us held back. So I would consider that to be definitely violence towards our people. I don't know if anybody else has put on that.
No, yeah, definitely, Desiree. I think, you know, you didn't mention it's just not violence that you get to experience, but also the violence that have been put in place as the system, right? And there's different forms of violence, you know, and there's physical, there's emotional, there's spiritual, there's systematic violence, you know, and it, you know, and when we're talking about that intergenerational trauma, let's just say your grandmother went through sexual abuse, you know, and, you know, went through this certain type of trauma. And it was your mother went through this, and then you might have gone through this, right? And you're just walking down the street, right? And you get this intuition, right? It's not really that intuition, like, hey, Airam, don't do this. You know, those are your ancestors telling you, Airam, don't do this, right? It's that trauma that we've carried from generations to generations that is actually passed on, that we carry in our DNA. You know, so when we are triggered, we respond to it right away, or sometimes we might even freeze, you know. But it's just that, you know, or sometimes we even become numb when we go through sexual violence. And 1 in 3 Indigenous women go through this, or just 1 in 3. And in general, 1 in 4 girls, 1 in 6 boys go through sexual abuse and other types of trauma. So that's a lot, you know. And I was just, you know, reading about this, you know, because it's a topic that a lot of us shut down on, you know, but a lot of us have been through it more than anybody, you know. Nobody should go through this. So when we're talking about violence, you know, just being put in this into institutions, even in the juvenile justice, in the juvenile facilities, that's still facing trauma, because we're getting taken away from our parents from our legal guardian. That's trauma. That's traumatic. When you enter the foster care system, that's trauma, because now you don't know anybody in there, and you have to deal with other young women or other young folks that are going through their own things. So it's just being taken away from our loved ones. That's keeping us in cages. That's violence. You know, violence that usually we don't hear about, because they're like, oh, you know, you deserve to be there. Nobody deserves to be there. It's a system that has failed us bad enough that we end up here. You know, so when we talk about violence, once again, it's so broad, it's so big, you know, where do we even start? You know, and where do we even start about this, you know? Yeah.
Yeah, and it sounds like there's this narrative that has been going on over and over that especially poor, indigenous, brown, Black people, poor people, low-income people, marginalized people, it's almost like there's a justification of violence happening to these communities. It's almost like what you said, like they deserve it, or look what they did wrong, or look, there is no action to actually resolve the root causes of violence, as you have mentioned. And so with that, let me just end on asking y'all, I appreciate y'all sharing your story, and thank you just for being here. And I feel like y'all are lights in the community doing the work that you're doing. But if you can share a little bit about what is your call to action to the youth of Salinas and the wider Monterey County, especially to our young girls, our young women, our LGBTQ, gender expansive, non-binary youth. And we can start with Des.
Okay, thank you so much, Rosalda, for bringing this on. I would say the call to action, I would say just be involved, and however you can, whether that be speaking at these budget meetings, sending letters, emails, any way that you can get involved within the political system, let your voice be heard. Your voice matters, and you are the future, and definitely want to put emphasis on that. Just make sure that you stay involved and pave the way for yourself and other future generations as well.
Yeah, as for me, it's just movements create possibilities, you know, and most importantly, we can demonstrate, we can go rally up, you know, but it's time to put pressure on our elected officials. We really want to make a change. This is it, locally. We've all walked down some part of town, and we're just like, oh, that just sucks, you know, or just like, oh, that looks ugly, you know. I wish I was from that side of town where they have better parks. Well, guess what? You know, this is a time for us to advocate for ourselves and be like, you know what? No, we want better parks. We want more youth programs. You know, we deserve the best of the best, because our community deserves the best of the best. You know, they don't deserve anything less. I often have heard an elected official talking about sidewalks. You have a good point, but it's just more than sidewalks. You know, it's just more than that. It's more than just over policing. That doesn't solve our issues. That does not solve anything at all. Our community does not have a good relationship with police officers. Why is that? Do they ever ask themselves why that is? If they want to dress up as chadros, just to be cultural, right? It's go ahead, you know. But our community needs more than just that. They need better relations, you know, with their elected officials. And elected officials, if you see a bunch of youth asking you for something, just think about when you were young. You know, this time around, I'm seeing a lot of youth that are just advocating for themselves, and it's just so awesome. I'm just like, yes. You know, I'm like, you know, super happy when I see this, because it's just, this is the time, you know, and or elected officials have to be on it, or we have to vote them out. Then that's something that, you know, do you want to be an elected official who's going to listen to the community, or do you just want to get voted out for the next election? And it is what it is, you know. I'd rather support my community and support the youth, because that's where priority should be. Not a youth center, not a juvenile hall. That's not caring for our youth. We need more than that. We need culture relevant. We need mental health, like Desiree mentioned. You know, we need more than just that. We need to see change. So for the youth out there, keep going at it. You know, you got this. Your voice matters. You matter. Your family matters. Our communities matter. So, yeah.
So
I'm super excited when I talk about it.
When are you running for city council?
You know, I'll talk to you about it later.
Well, y'all heard it from these two MILPA ladies themselves, MILPA fam, MILPA sisters. Always hit up Des, Airam via MILPA. If you have any questions, if you want to reach out, if you're a youth in the community or anybody in the community that you feel like you resonated with their words, that's why we're here, to be able to connect you with people that are doing work in the community so that you yourself can get involved. And so con eso, I want to thank both Desiree and Airam for being with us today for the Milpa show. And make sure to, Xinachtli already started, pero definitely connect for the next round of Xinachtli. And otherwise, just programming that's happening here at Milpa. There's Sembrando la Milpa that's starting again October 7th. And so that's for all, co-ed, boys, girls, LGBTQ youth, non-binary, for them to be able to join in via Zoom. And so con eso, thank y'all. Today's Friday, so definitely enjoy y'all's weekend. Have a good one. And thank you to our audience that's watching from home. Ahí estamos. Peace.